So welcome to the NeuroCyber series. I'm delighted to introduce Caroline Turner, the CEO of Creased Puddle, and Chris Dunning-Walton, who I'm told in his day job is InfoSec People, and then does a variety of nighttime things that he'll tell you about later. We're here today with these two folks as their expertise is definitely in recruitment and in inclusive recruitment specifically. And we really need a conversation about that because talking to lots of people in the neurodiversity, neurodivergent communities, they're really experiencing some challenges in feeling that they're part of the process rather than part of the problem. So, Chris, Caroline, I'll let you do some additional introductions and why you're passionate about this particularly, and hopefully we can move on from there.
Okay, yeah, good morning, everybody. So my name's Caroline Turner, I'm CEO of Creased Puddle. So we're York-based up in Winterfell in the north of England, not far from the wall for all those Game of Thrones fans. Without Dragons, we have, there's the core team of us here, but we have a UK network of psychologists and inclusion specialists and neurodiversity coaches that help us support businesses around the UK and beyond in relation to their recruitment, their retention and their progression portfolios, specifically supporting people who are like us, autistic, ADHD, dyslexic, dyspraxic, have Tourette syndrome, processing sensory disorder, because we are a collective of ND thinkers. We are also a collective of parents and carers, and certainly I think that that's sometimes a missed voice in this conversation. And we are actively involved, our day-to-day, this is what runs through our veins in relation to neurodiversity, particularly in the workplace.
Fantastic. And Chris Dunning-Walton, I am in my day job the MD of a company called InfoSec People, a specialist recruitment company working in the cybersecurity space. I was working out the other day, we've placed over 500 cybersecurity professionals over the last 10 years and work across the UK. In my other activities, I'm also one of the founders of Cynam, Cyber Cheltenham, and one of the cyber clusters, and actively involved in a number of other initiatives. Neurodiversity is something very close to my heart for personal reasons, with family members who are neurodivergent. And we also are seeing a massive trend with our clients around diversity on a wider scale, where they are still struggling with hiring, and not just hiring, but actually 20% of the what we talk about today is probably hiring, then what happens after that, the enabling of diverse individuals within their organizations. So delighted to be here. Thank you very much for having us.
Fantastic. So thank you both. I just picked up something on Caroline's intro that I'd love to ask a question of, because you mentioned the voice of parents is underrepresented. And actually, as an autistic person, we in the community think the opposite. We actually tend to go, the voice of parents is often speaking over, because they're typically neurotypical. So what makes you think the voice of parents is underrepresented, and what are your experiences there that would make you say that?
Yeah, so I think probably I am a parent of a dyslexic daughter, an autistic son, and it started to trigger in me a conversation when we started to move away from when I did 21 years in policing, and I suppose we started out that journey thinking, right, you come to work and you leave your home life very firmly at home. Whatever happens at home is home. Whatever happens at work stays at work. That used to be the ethos. And obviously over the last 10 years, 15 years, that's really, really started to change, in that, because we know that what happens at work influences home and vice versa. So actually you can't ever separate off those two things. And actually one enhances the other anyway. So what I found, my experience, was that I limited my own career. So I'd passed my sergeant's exams, I'd passed my inspector's exams, I had no more exams to do. And as somebody with ADHD, passing exams and going through those processes can often be really challenging. But I needed to stay in a reliable position So I knew how much money I was getting in, I knew what days I was working, I knew what hours that I were working, so that I could then make sure that my home life was one of structure and predictability. Because the opposite of that was a huge increase in anxiety, and things just didn't work the way that they should for everybody within the family, which then does go on to have that knock on in the workplace. So I absolutely limited my career. I didn't go for the next rank. I stayed knowing what I knew. And so when I retired in 2017 after 21 years and started Creased Puddle, I really wanted to ensure that when organisations were looking at their neurodiversity portfolios, that the voice of parents and carers was really being heard within that. So there are protections that they are afforded under the Equality Act as well. And as dependents, we know that there will be times when there are things happening at home that directly impact on that individual in the workplace. So for me, it was really important that whenever we do piece of work with organisations, that we not only look at the individuals, but actually the parents and carers of those individuals, or certainly of individuals, and that they have that equal voice within that conversation.
That's really, really interesting, because we often think about equal voices as in the first-hand experience. But you're right in that it's not only the person's support to thrive, the individual, but it's also their partners and helping them, particularly as late diagnosis is a much bigger thing now. And when people are having their own redefinition of who they are, that also changes relationship dynamics and things like that. And that's quite important. But that, is interesting in the whole realm of recruitment, because we're talking then about reasonable accommodations for people to support their family.
Absolutely.
And that's a conversation that is often not heard. And that is a really valid voice that I can definitely take when we're having community conversations, because that tends to get a little thrown out with the bathwater sometimes. Mainly because, quite rightly, people don't want to be spoken for. And that can happen quite a lot with that parent dynamic. It's like, at what point does the person who can self-represent be allowed to become an adult in that conversation? Chris, what are your experiences? Because I know you have family members and your own experiences.
Yeah, it's a really interesting one, isn't it? And I think it's probably endemic to a wider conversation around education across society, really, about neurodivergent people, because I guess there's still a stigma attached to it, where you might say my son or daughter is autistic, and an older generation might go, "Oh, really? Oh, I'm so sorry to hear that. What went wrong?" And there's still that sort of misunderstanding, misalignment, and ignorance in many ways. And I think that probably still pervades a wider conversation within society. But certainly, I think there are chinks of light. I think things are definitely progressing, and conversations now. There's a lot more thoughtfulness, a lot more inclusivity around that, where it's no longer stigmatized as a negative. There's actually more of a conversation and an accommodation and an inclusive and enablement piece around that. So me, myself, we saw an educational psychologist for our son, who is a sensory seeking child, and very, very, very obviously sensory seeking, and we've seen a lot of things, and actually it was quite interesting talking to that psychologist, the first psychologist we spoke to, who said, what have you got concerns about? That's what they and I said, no, I haven't got any concerns. I just want to be a better parent for my child, because we've noticed some things that he does that other children don't necessarily do. So I want to be able to understand how he's thinking when he's doing different things, so then I can connect with him and enable him and talk with him more in a more thoughtful way, and then and be able to still develop, if that makes sense. So I think Yes, I agree with both sides. I think, Nicola, I think there's still helicopter parenting as well. My child is autistic. They need all of this. And then you've got the child going, hold on a minute, I might need something slightly different from that. So there is obviously, you still get that as well. But at least we are now having those conversations. There is some things that are evolving, which is positive.
We've touched on the sort of experiences of parents, and obviously there's a lot of people in our industry, particularly cybersecurity, who are driven to make things better because they're parents. I'm part of NeuroCyber, and actually the foundation of NeuroCyber, by the awesomeness that is Mike Spain, was driven because he wanted a better outcome for his son as he got older, or better opportunities for his son. So there's a lot of good done by parents. So I think that's quite a useful framing for then how we take that advocacy and goodwill and use that to enable better platforms for the voices of actually neurodivergent people or neuroatypical people, whatever people's preference is. So that would be an awesome thing. So on the basis of really more practical things that Caroline and yourself, Chris, that you've both experienced. Caroline, what things have you encountered that either yourself or other companies that you've encountered do that really put the welcome mat out to say, yes, please come and join our business?
So where I've seen it work, it depends. I'll start that whole conversation again in my head. What we know is that actually, if you have 30% representation within a department, an organisation, a team, then there will be a natural and organic self-identification. So people will say, that's my tribe over there. And actually that conversation will happen organically. I think sometimes we get too focused on using, Calibri, Vidana, minimum 12, no black on white. We get the semantics of job applications. We get, even though those things are important because it sends a message, representation is actually the best way to do it. I think that we sometimes miss a trick when we talk about, let's just go back to parents and carers, because for me, actually, actively recruiting parents and carers brings a huge amount into my organisation. Retaining them brings a huge amount, keeping them here keeps a huge amount within my organisation, but also developing them and promoting them. So the whole piece, the whole life cycle of somebody's career, making sure that you've got individuals and parents and carers as part of that conversation provides benefits. So going back to practical things that you can do, first of all, one thing, I was presenting for Special Ops, which is firearms, dogs, and I was presenting at the Specialist Ops conference on Wednesday in Sheffield for the College of Policing, and there was a whole discussion around protected characteristics and the challenges in relation to recruiting people into those specialist ops that are predominantly white men in those particular departments. And looking at the challenges of why and how we then go on to do that. And I think two things that came out really strongly for me were representation and being and the other thing was about inquiring. So in talking about practical steps, it is about being brave enough to sit down with people who have not applied for that job and saying, just tell us why. Why didn't you apply? Because you can read all the research, and we've got lots of research. There's so much research out there why people don't apply for positions, but actually sitting down and saying, why didn't you apply? That will give you everything you need to know, because every organisation is different. And it may well be because you didn't offer various ways for somebody to show you what they were capable of, or that interview, or adapt working practices. It may well be that it is about those small things. They didn't think that perhaps you were ready for the conversation, but they actually might be able to give you some really good stuff around, your assessment was multiple choice. I prefer to write things out longhand. You only offered me video interviewing, but I would prefer to meet you in person. I'd have liked to have brought a prompt with me, just somebody to say example number 6 that we've practiced in the interview, but you said that actually that couldn't happen. Maybe it's about you took too much notice of my CV that says I've not been in work for the last 5 years. So and actually, Steph is a good example of getting it right. So Steph hadn't worked for 17 years before she came to work here, and she's awesome. And our favourite day is a Friday because we just get to work and the office is quiet. We get to work together. She's ADHD, autistic and dyslexic. She does loads of our admin. She's worked for me for 18 months. She was my first employee 18 months ago, and now we've got a team of 8. Anyway, she never interviewed in the conventional sense. We never sat across a desk. I met her at an event. And started a conversation with her, and I think and had that inquiring mind about, well, what are those barriers of stopping you for doing what you're really, really good at? And it was about, and sometimes I think it's about starting that conversation.
Yeah, I'd probably add, before I just pop over to Chris and ask for your thoughts as well, that I would always want, as an autistic person, to separate out the support of people who are supporters of other people and hiring neurodivergent, neuroatypical people. And the reason for that is one of the key reasons for a business to hire neurological difference in is the hardwired thinking differently that helps combat groupthink. So that hardwired way of thinking that somebody that's autistic or dyslexic or dyspraxic will have, that is going to be different, the same way as somebody from a different socioeconomic background or different ethnicity or life experiences may bring different types of thinking with them. That's the benefit. So that there's a difference there between accommodating and supporting people to thrive because of additional things that they've got that are sort of wider reaching, and the why people are actually wanting or realizing now that it's a good idea to hire difference in thought, if that makes sense. So one is the conversation you just had about interviewing differently and things like that, and the other is an equally important conversation, but a different type of conversation in terms of allowing your team to thrive. Would that be fair, Caroline?
Yeah, I don't know. I think we just view it all the one and the same here, if I'm honest, at Creased Puddle. It's just anything that gets the best out of an individual in whatever circumstance. So yeah, we might use the term support, but ordinarily we'll use the phraseology about how do I help you thrive, and how do how do I help you thrive? How do I help you thrive? How do I get the best out of you? But also, how do you get the best out of me? So I had a new a business accountant start on Monday, and we sat down to have an onboarding conversation. I said, how do you prefer for me to manage you? And he just looked stunned, like no one had ever asked him that before. But ultimately, he will know the ways that I will get the best out of him. But sometimes I just don't think that we allow for that natural and organic conversation. So that's kind of how we do it. It becomes harder in larger organisations that have lots of prescriptive policies and procedures and systems, very ingrained, entrenched, traditional way of doing things. And I think what neurodiversity does is give us an opportunity to rip up the rule book, to be disruptive, to challenge those traditional ways. And when you're a lot of the conversations that I have are in hierarchical organisations like command and control, like the police, for example, in also in the military. When I'm having those conversations, there will always be an element of that. There's some big tankers to turn around.
Yeah. Chris, I would ask if there's anything you'd like to add to that, but I think that having conversations about preferences for thriving is a great cut point to that. In terms of practical things that people can take away today and do tomorrow, are there any things that would be your sort of top 3? And along with that, we've had a question from one of the people in the attendees saying, what are the number 1 or even top 3 reasons that hold neurodiverse / neurodivergent candidates back from applying for jobs?
Okay. Wow. Big topics. Where shall I start? So I'll give you a broad stroke of what we're seeing in the industry, what I've seen in the industry over the last 5 years, because it's really only in the last, very few number of years that people have even been talking about this whole subject. So I'll give you live examples. We work with some really big organizations, FTSE 100 companies, and they'll come to us and, we'll be speaking to a hiring manager in the cybersecurity space, and they'll say, we need women. We need a woman in this job. And you go, why? And they go, because we lack diversity. And you go, okay, so why women? Because we don't have enough women. Okay, but why not? Why are we focusing on women rather than ethnic diversity or neurodiversity? So neurodiversity in hiring is still, unfortunately, not thought of as as an obvious way of gaining diversity within the workforce at this moment in time. Number one, I'd say, because when we're talking to large companies about, let's talk about diversity, they instantly click into ethnic diversity and gender diversity, and that's about it. And then you go, what about neurodiversity? And they go, oh, that's a good point. Yeah, well, of course we wouldn't discriminate. And you're kind of like, it's not really the point. So there is still a very large problem in the whole industry. And I'm going to, fantastic timing. 3 days ago, the NCSC came out with their latest report, which I would highly encourage everybody to read it. It's very, very interesting. The numbers are still quite stark. And in that report, they do actually highlight that neurodivergent applicants and workers are still finding it very difficult to be themselves within the workforce, within the workplace. So as a broad stroke, I'd say neurodiversity, and there are some outliers. I'd say Titania, fantastic, E2E, fantastic, who not just actively seek candidates who they can bring into the company, but also have a fantastic internal culture of inclusivity that enables those people to thrive. So the second part, what I want to talk about was there is a lack of sort of thinking about neurodiversity as a priority when we're talking about diversity more widely. Secondly, is when we're talking to big companies, they say, we need more diversity. We need to give us a diverse shortlist of candidates. We go, that's fine. Yes. Talk to us about how you're going to interview differently to how you have done typically in the past. That means that you are going to not just accommodate, but look at ways to identify talent and bring it in however that looks. And they kind of, again, it's a little bit like headlights, and they go, what? Well, they've got to fit the mold, they've got to do the normal process. And you're kind of like, well, again, that's 20% of what we're talking about is the solution, if you like, is finding those individuals that might be right for your organization. The next part, as Caroline says, is the interview process around how companies can ensure that their interview process is fit for purpose when it comes to neurodivergent applicants. Another quick segue, if I may. And this is a wider question we might come back to. Is it up to the applicant to stick their hand up in the air and go, I am autistic? Or should we aim to become a society where those people do not need to say that, do not need to volunteer that, and actually companies have an enabled and a culture internally that means that if you're autistic, that's fantastic. You can, as you say, Caroline, there's already a tribe here that you can segue to that. And if you need this, you can. It's there for you, rather than going, I am autistic, so I need, do you know what I mean? So for me, the ideal situation is neurodivergent applicants don't need to say, I am this or I am that, treat me differently. We as a society include and have a process that is inclusive enough to level up, and there doesn't need to be that differentiation. Because Nicola, you were going, you don't have never need to do this, but you're going for a job, you wouldn't want to go, hello, my name's Nicola, I'm a woman. I just want to state that, just so you know, from a diversity point of view, I'm a woman. Just so we know, should we move on? Have you got the ready for your diverse questions? Anyway, I segue slightly. So going back to, things that, let's come on to the things that companies can start to think about. Number one, this is about cultural shift. So there is no surprise. This is going to take time, because if we're saying that the solution is not just about identifying, coming up with, especially for larger companies, coming up with inclusive interview and attraction techniques for their companies to bring those diverse individuals to their companies in the first place, but actually creating cultures internally that are not just tolerating of, but enabling for those individuals. That's going to take time, because actually a lot of that is going to be around the people that those people will work with as well. Oh, Rachel's not very communicative. She totally blanked me this morning, or, do you know what I mean? So there's a lot of people who, if you're not typical, then you're seen differently, because people are ignorant to actually how they work with colleagues. I'd say one company, one employer that does incredibly well, GCHQ, and they get a lot of stick because they have problems with diversity, or challenges with diversity from some angles, but actually from a neurodiversity point of view, they do very well. I gather they have a very inclusive internal working arrangements that are evident in the amazing, wonderful work that they do and the wonderful people they have. But things that people do, so creating good things. Hybrid working is now the norm. Brilliant, fantastic. Thank you, COVID. Got that one out of the way. But hybrid working actually is incredibly beneficial. So ways that companies that can use hybrid working to be more inclusive from a neurodivergent point of view. Looking at the data to understand what companies can do better. So again, one of the questions we ask when a company comes to us and is talking about diversity is, what use cases do you have to show that you as a company are enabling individuals to both come into your company and take a career path that sees them thrive within an organization? And again, a lot of organizations really struggle to go, oh, well, we hired this person and then they're now here. There isn't really that flight path. And actually, at this moment in time, I think one of the areas that we again, is a big hole. I don't know very many leadership level people in the cybersecurity industry who would actively stick their hands up in the air and say, I am autistic and I am a CISO for this company. Or do you know what I mean? So I think there is still a stigma within leadership, actually, that neurodiversity is still a challenge that we need to overcome and see as a positive thing, not a negative thing. I'll leave it there because I'm taking up on the stage. There's some other things we could talk about in terms of things that companies can do.
So I'd just recircle back to the question in terms of what people have said that I know in the community of why they haven't applied. And typically there are a couple of things. One is that they believe that the next level up isn't going to be as supportive. And I think that that's a general experience that I've experienced in leaders. As you get higher up the chain of leadership, it seems to be that many organizations assume that you do not need the same level of support anymore. And actually, it's still a new role and a new position for many people. Secondly is the managing of people. Some neurotypes find that particularly draining and challenging. And yet there are lots of organizations that haven't managed to separate out the fact that they've got supreme specialists that are excellent at their work. So that's using technology, penetration testers. Many people in the penetration testing industry are also neuroatypical, statistically, and the KPMG NCSC report actually shows that there's a higher number of neurodivergent people in our industry than there are in potentially other industries compared to the general population. And it was about 37%, I think, that said that they felt limited or hampered in the growth of their careers or discriminated against in some way. And actually neurodivergent people would think one of the highest two sets of people in our industry for feeling that, which is obviously something to solve. And then the last one is that they don't feel that it's something they actually want to do, to jump out of their groove that they're really comfortable with. So that's sort of what people have said to me, directly that have said that. I think there are more neurodivergent leaders visible than ever before, which is great. So if you think of Elon Musk, I'm obviously autistic and I'm one of the people known in cybersecurity. And it's also happening outside of cyber because the lady that has just come into the Institute of Directors. She has just announced her difference in thinking as a positive. So that is becoming more common, which is great that leaders are stepping up to be examples. But I think that's not necessarily flowing down. And there is a great guy in America called Magnus Hedemark, who is senior in tech. And he has said that he has the challenge that he's got to a certain level, and the next level up, where he would get a PA and people that would unlock his productivity, also mean he would end up with a load of people that would potentially block his productivity because of the extra stuff that he wouldn't necessarily enjoy the flow of in that next level up. It's not something he wanted to do, but he would appreciate the PA and people to unlock some of the other stuff that he does. And it's really interesting about how that hierarchical structure in companies can get in the way of thriving and unlocking people. There are some really large organizations. Kinetic is one that I could cite off the top of my head, where they talk about preferences for people rather than prescriptive formulas. And I think that preference word and thriving is coming out more. People are recognizing that everybody is different. But I would still say we've got a long way to go. And the average job advert, which cites things like whether you've got free Coke or gym membership, but doesn't state typical accommodations that you've made for people and would be happy to discuss, that's a welcome mat. Traveling differences, accommodations in how you might be interviewed, listing them to say, look, this is normal for us. We're completely open to this kind of thing. So you don't have that fear factor of asking and potentially worrying that you'll disadvantage yourself against other candidates. I would love to see a time where normal accommodations, practical accommodations, are listed as commonly as you get free Coke. That's what I'd love to see, so that it does become the norm. When you think of every single training course I've ever been in as a reflective thinker who's also autistic, you actively have to lobby to get the course content in advance. Now, I'm not the only reflective thinker in an organization, so you're disadvantaging some of the people that attend that course. And that's, again, really common, that you get surprised by the course content. Even the sort of conversations where you're asked to say, well, what might you need? What are your preferences? They're often verbal and on the fly, which is the opposite of what some people need. So those would be sort of typical things that I would throw out in terms of what kind of questions are you asking and how are you asking them? And before you've even asked them, you ask the question of what would your preference be to have this kind of conversation? Because typically somebody has to move out of their comfort zone. And typically the people that are asked to move out of their comfort zone are the people that are at the disadvantage. And I think I would always say that if I'm a fish, I'm constantly judged on how I climb trees. And, and that's kind of common in our industry still. So we're about 4 minutes over. So would anybody, like Caroline, would you like to kind of have a few minutes on anything you think we've missed, anything that we, and any top books or sites that you would recommend for people who are at the stage of, I just want to be able to do something. Tell me what to do.
Yeah. Well, first of all, Dr. Luke Bearden, who I co-presented with on Monday at the National Police Autism Association conference, has got a new book out. He's just voiced it up, and it's all to do with anxiety in people who are autistic. He's autistic himself. He does some amazing work out of Sheffield Hallam. A big fan of Dr. Luke B. So have checked that out. Just picking up on there what you were talking about, I think sometimes we start with recruitment and we immediately think of a job interview, but that's just so one-dimensional. I think that there is some, people might look on Indeed or they might go through a recruitment process, or they might be attracted by the words that are used, but then actually what will put them off is, how do I do that? And what people don't understand is that sometimes a crib sheet, a flow chart of what you do next is required and would help with that. So as part of a natural recruitment process, that you advertise the job and then say, please download a what happens next document. And within that, it has, complete this, then we'll do that, and has that those stages, and then we will contact you, and then we will send an email. And because that we're supposed to just know what happens, aren't we, when we apply for a job, and that needs to be explicit, and that can massively reduce anxiety and can really help with understanding what that process is. And I think that's a free, low cost, no cost adjustment that we could all make. Thank you, Caroline. Chris?
Well, I'm going to do a shameless plug for my fellow co-conspirators today, Caroline Turner, because I was reading your Empowering the Neurodiversity in the Workplace during COVID-19 document the other day, and that is fascinating and very enlightening. So for anybody that's interested, I would absolutely, I'm sure Caroline wouldn't mind anybody reaching out to her to learn more about that.
On the website, actually, yeah. Thank you.
And I'd say that particular article I found very insightful. The NCSC article, absolutely fantastic as well. I think for the community in general, there are lots of people now who want to help in many, many different ways. So connecting with as many people as you can. Nicola, you're doing amazingly, but there's so many people that want to help if you just ask. So the door is now firmly open. And lots of people would gladly stick their hands up, I think, and that's really, really encouraging as well. And long may that continue, because there is so much work to be done.
Fantastic. I would also add there's a brilliant book by Victoria Honeybourne called The Neurodiverse Workplace. So if you're listening to this webinar and you're at the stage of, well, I don't really know what my obligations are as an employer, or legislation, or the 60-second AB equivalent of what can I do quickly to make me more appealing, to be more inclusive, and I'm not really sure where to start, that is a great book, The Neurodiverse Workplace by Victoria Honeybourne, because it's a real start to finish kind of primer to tick some boxes as a good bedrock. So thank you so much, Chris and Caroline. If you're listening and you want a starting place in terms of recruitment or people to engage with, these two folks are great people, which is why we invited them. And thank you so much for coming today. And we will leave this recording up and put it onto the NeuroCyber website in the next few days, and then you'll be able to review it. So thank you, Chris. Thank you, Caroline.
Thank you.